Welcome everybody to the Imperium Racing YouTube channel. I am Zach, and today we'll be doing a video on how to replace your front disc brakes, especially if you have a floating caliper front disc brakes. This will be very similar to whatever car you have. We're going to do mine on my 1999 Acura Integra GSR. So we obviously get started with jacking the car up. You want to make sure you block or chock a wheel and then jack it up. I personally am lazy, so I just set the parking brake and then jack the front up first. Set it on some jack stands, and even once on the jack stands, I usually leave the jack under there just as a little extra bit of security. Zip zap that wheel off. I'm a huge fan of electric tools, and this Mac half-inch impact gun has been fantastic. I don't know why I put this picture here, but these are my old rotors that I'll be taking off in this video. You can see why. They were on there for years and years and years and sat in San Francisco without moving. So this is an impact driver set and comes with all those different bits in there. This is the tool itself. I believe I'm calling that the right thing. As you can see with the screwdriver, the screws do not come out. If you have any older Honda or Acura for that matter, and you're trying to take the rotors off, you'll have this issue if it's the original rotor. So this tool is pretty sweet. You hit it with a hammer, and the impact ends up turning the end of the tool. So it's just a big old shock to any screw. They're really good for rotors. You can use them for other things too. But as you can see, after a few hammer smacks, I can break the screw loose with my hand. So just jolts it loose. It's great. After getting those screws loose, I will actually leave them in there. It holds the rotor on to keep the rotor out of the way while we're working. And there you can see all the bits that come in that set. You can probably rent that set from a auto parts store, but I'll put a link down below for one as well. This will be the first of many terrible shots in this video. That's a guide pin right there that I'm touching, guide pin bolt. That's what holds the caliper to the caliper bracket. That's the bottom. So there's two of those guide pin bolts. And these two bolts right here that are kind of dark hold the brake line to the knuckle. You're going to need to take those off. Otherwise there's not enough brake line to get the caliper off and to move it out of the way. So it's really easy. On this car it's just two 10mm bolts. Zip those right off as I'm doing now. And once those are off, you loosen those guide pin bolts I just pointed to previously, and you'll be able to slip the caliper off and move it far, far, far out of the way. Once again, great camera angle. I don't know if you noticed, but I just took the caliper off, so now we can slide the brake pads out, and the clips, the metal clips that hold the brake pads in, that's the inner pad. Notice it had the wear sensor on it. It's a big metal bar sticking off. You need to make sure that wear sensor goes back to the inside pad. Alright, there's the two bolts that hold the caliper bracket on. I believe there's 17mm on this car. Right there, you can see it lit up. And down there, just to the right of those guide pins. So I tried breaking these loose with a ratchet and socket. They were on there way too tight. So we ended up PB blastering them and letting that soak for a little bit. And normally, ideal situation, you do one side of the car at a time when you're doing brakes. Because if you run into an issue, you don't know where something goes, how it goes back together, or anything like that. You simply reference the other side of the car. That's why you do one at a time. That's the ideal situation. I'm fairly familiar with these cars, so I was just bouncing back and forth between each side and letting the PB blaster soak in. And even after soaking in, the ratchet still didn't work. So you can see me going at it with the impact gun here, and it comes right off. So a breaker bar or impact gun might be necessary, but if you don't have that, let the PB blaster sit for as long as possible. That would be the caliper bracket that I'm cleaning. So that caliper bracket bolts to the knuckle, and then your brake caliper bolts to that bracket. The bracket is only necessary to remove if you're trying to get the rotor off, as I just took it off. If you're only doing brake pads, you don't need to take those rotor screws out, and you also don't need to take that bracket off. You can just slide the caliper off and replace pads. Here you'll just see me do a lot of cleaning to the hub here, and as well as the bracket and the clips that hold the brake pads in. It all just gets covered in brake dust and rust and build up from the road. So these were clearly the original rotors, been on there for almost 20 years, sat, didn't get used, so I just cleaned up as much as I possibly could. Right there in the back you see me spreading pushing the piston back into the caliper. You can barely see it. I have a picture of the tools coming up here in a little bit, but you will need to do that when you take the brake caliper off, because your old pads are worn down and the new pads are not worn down, so they're physically thicker and larger, so you will have to push the piston back into the caliper as I just did. Here's the tools I was talking about. You're going to need one of these to push the piston back into the caliper, allow you room to put the caliper back on your new brake pads. Otherwise the caliper won't go back on with new pads. And if you're doing rear brakes, be careful of parking brakes. You got to know how to loosen the parking brake before pushing the piston back in, or you can break the caliper. There we got some brake paste, brake grease, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to grease the guide pins here. So those guide pins slide right out of the bracket. If you're doing brakes, why not just take them out, take a look at them. I grease them no matter what, but if the grease on there looks old, looks dry, doesn't look like it's grease anymore, then you can wipe it off. But this brake paste is great for popping those bad boys out. Squeeze them on the tip and all around the guide pin, and then spin it as you go back in, and it will evenly coat the whole guide pin. If you don't have well-greased guide pins, it can cause uneven wear on your brake pad and brake rotor, which will end up costing you more money because they'll get worn out faster and you'll have to replace them sooner. Or if it wears on the inside more, you won't see it and you might damage components. Basically, we get everything nice and clean, and then we put a little more brake grease on there. And this is brake clean I'm using right here. So PB Blaster, let it sit. I'm scraping and scrubbing, and then brake clean is great because it evaporates. You don't have to dry it or anything like that. As you can see, the hub has already dried itself in that time lapse. And after I brush these, I'm pretty sure I will brake clean them again. Gets all the dust off, and then it dries pretty quick on its own. And I have a rag down there to catch everything because brake dust is pretty gross. So try not to breathe it in. Try not to get it everywhere. And these are the clips that you probably didn't see when I took them off because bad camera angle and it was too quick. These clips in my hand clip onto that caliper bracket that's on the floor behind my hand, and these hold the brake pads in place, allowing the brake pads to only slide towards the rotor and away from the rotor, and not out of the caliper or anything like that. They allow the brake pads to slide in the only direction you want them to slide. So now that I've cleaned them, I'm going to put a little bit of grease on there just so the brake pad can slide around. Very minimal amount, it's just a little tiny bit. And here's a quick overview of my rotors and pads. There's a very important piece of paper right here. It came with the rotors. That is directional. Rotors have a left and a right sticker on them. They are directional because they're slotted. Those slots right there have to be facing the correct direction. If you have solid rotors, don't worry about it. If you have slotted or drilled and slotted, read the directions. Make sure you put them on correctly. I have EBC green stuff rear and front pads, EBC rear rotors, and StopTech front rotors. This is basically entry-level track stuff. Now we're sliding the new rotor on. Looks way better than the old one. And I'm going to put these screws back in just to hold the rotor in place because when the rotor's all loose, it's really annoying to get everything back on there. So having the screws to hold it in place while you're reassembling is fantastic. I'm going to take these screws out at the end simply because they're old and rusty and I don't want them in there, but I will keep them in for reassembly. A little more grease on those clips. And we're going to put the bracket on. You're going to want to put the bracket on, get the screws tight and torqued before continuing, because once you continue, everything else will get in your way. So put this back on, bolts in, torque them to spec. This car, they're around 80 foot-pounds, I think, something like that. But look up the specs for your car. And you can see me putting these clips back on. They go on the top and bottom of that bracket. They clip on, it's fairly obvious. Again, reference the other side if you're not sure. And once they're on, we can slide the brake pads in. Make sure you get your brake pads in correctly. Some won't matter. Some have a wear indicator. As you can see on this one in my hand, there's a metal piece of flat metal sticking out on one side. That one's going to go on the inside. Once the brake pad gets low, that piece of metal scrapes on your rotor and makes a terrible noise to let you know to replace it. Boom, slide that bad boy in just like that. And now the caliper can go back on. And if it doesn't fit on, take it back off and push that piston in a little bit further. And then you should be able to slide it on, line up the holes, stick those bolts back in the guide pins. Another tip is some cars you have to hold the guide pin while you tighten or loosen that guide pin bolt. So be aware of that. If it's just spinning, you probably have to get a wrench on the guide pin, look for a couple flat spots. This one holds itself. So then we're going to torque those guide pin bolts. Once those guide pin bolts are torqued, as I'm doing now, those are around 30 foot-pounds or something for this car. Significantly lower than the bracket bolts, but again, look up your torque specs. Now we're going to put back in the two 10 millimeters that hold on the brake line. Don't forget about that. You don't want your brake line floating around, getting stuck in axles or suspension or anything like that. So we're going to put those back on. They just need to be tight. As I said, I'm taking out these screws, and I also took that sticker off later. Don't worry, I did. All right, guys, thanks for watching the video. That's an overview. The only thing I missed was when you're pushing that piston back in the caliper, it is going to force some brake fluid back up into the master cylinder in your engine bay. So check that first. If it's full, you got to suck some fluid out. Otherwise, it'll overflow while you're doing the job. And then once you are done with the job, this is very, very important. Before you start the car, pump the brake pedal a few times. And then start the car, pump the brake pedal a few more times. And then check your brake fluid level. And if it's low, put some clean, new fluid in there, not old fluid. This is really important. If you just do your brakes and then you go and drive, your car will not have brakes. And that's very scary and not good. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to pump your brakes after finishing a brake job before driving the car. Very important. Thanks for watching.
Peace, amigos.